welcome everyone, and thank you very much for joining us today at Indonesian Campus Workers Union third podcast. We are very happy to open this conversation between colleagues and union workers from Indonesia and France, especially with friends and comrades from CGT at the French National Museum of Natural History, or Muséum National d'Histoire Naturelle. Pardon my French.
It's very good.
It's perfect.
For us, this discussion is not only about one institution or one local struggle. It is also about broader questions concerning public knowledge, research, culture, labor, and justice. So, across different contexts, we increasingly see how institutions that preserve knowledge, biodiversity, archives, and public memory are facing financial pressures, casualization, and growing inequalities within their own workplaces. At the same time, workers who sustain these institutions, such as librarians, technical staff, researchers, archivists, and support workers, often remain invisible despite the essential role they play. From Indonesia, many of these issues currently faced by workers at the museum resonate strongly with struggles we are also experiencing around labor rights, institutional recognition, and democratic participation. So, I would like to invite our comrades from CGT Museum to introduce themselves and a brief introduction about CGTs at the museum. Please, screen is yours.
Okay. So hello everyone, and thank you very much for the invitation. So I am Liz. This is Caroline and Oscar. And the three of us are PhD students at the Museum of Natural History in Paris. And we are all working on different problematics, but encompassing above all ecology and the past, knowledge about the past. So yes, and we are all in the CGT syndicate at the museum.
Maybe you want us to talk a little bit about what is CGT at first and what is CGT in the museum.
Yes.
So, should I go?
Yes, go ahead.
Correct me if I say anything that is not true, but CGT is the biggest work union that is in France, the oldest historic one. And it's more than 150-year old. It was created by putting together all the confederation of workers that were previously in the public system, and it was like people from one field of work, like the artisans, and they were having guilds and work union, and it was a way of creating this confederation by putting all this together and create a workforce and a politicized force that can be an answer to the capitalism that was expanding. Us, we are at the CGT Museum, which is a branch of the CGT. There's a lot of organization, which is, I think, the case in most work union or all around the world. But we are part of the museum, which is part of the confederation of the unions of the education system, the cultural system, and the scientific system. And this is more broadly inside the national confederation of all this work.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think this is an important point because our syndicate is really interprofessional. It is not just about specific working status.
Building.
Yeah. So we are in CGT Museum, but when we go on meetings, on larger meetings, on formations, we can meet workers from very different backgrounds, from factories, from the educational system, from private companies too. And this is a richness of CGT, I think, to be able to gather all these people from very different backgrounds, which find actually several problematics together to find in their own working environments, you know. So, yes.
And it is also something that is good as a politicized workforce, but also at an individual point of view, where you get to share your way of living and to be submitted to capitalistic pressure with workers from very different fields of work. Like when we go to protest and we meet people that are like railway workers, and we are having the same solidarity and compassion, it's very stimulating to see that we would maybe have never interacted without syndicalism. And we can feel a lot of loneliness inside a capitalistic society that is made to isolate people, to get them to work efficiently and not organize and not criticize the capitalistic system. And this is something that is very life enhancing, I think,
Yeah.
to meet all these workers and to know the sympathy you can have and that you can get along with a lot of people.
Yeah, and it was also historically a key to the success of these syndicate movements, because it is when people started to gather together from different factories, from different backgrounds. It is the point where they actually started something big and something that could become efficient to get more rights, to get to work less. All the different measures that we won in France was thanks to these big movements and organized by these interprofessional syndicates.
Yeah. This is a pattern that you can find inside a museum, like in every research institution, whereas we are all scientists in becoming, but there are a lot of people working in the museum, as you say, they are the supportive workers of the science, but we are also an institution that have a cultural value that is sharing knowledge to the public, but also there's a big garden that is also showing like the life inside Paris. And so there are workers of the gardeners that are working in the museum. And all these people, we might not have talked to them without unionizing. And now that we are in the union of the museum, I feel we are not the scientists are not the principal force inside the
it is not
union.
actually.
And so the protest we are having and the strike we are having at the museum right now is the direct result of all this field of works that are coming together inside the museum.
Speaking of strike, you're just mentioning, I think that's a perfect segue for me to carry on for the next question for us to discuss. Can you help us better understand the current situation, what is happening at the moment, and why workers decided to organize and protest together at the museum?
There is a mobilization currently of that began with the librarians of the Bibliothèque Centrale du Museum, so the central library of the museum, which is a place where there are a lot of books, but also of archives, for example, some collection, for example, also. So it's a really precious patrimonially place, really important. But since last January, some librarians decided to unionize, because of the proof that they have that they are the less well-paid librarians of all Paris. But you know that in Paris, the capital of France, so there is a really high level of life. It's really expensive to live in Paris. So there is really a gap, yes. And in addition, there is also some proof that there is an inegalities on the repartition of primes between people, and there's inegalities are not correlated to the status of, or example, the job. So some people have really a lot of money at the end of the year, for example, and others don't. And there is no transparency about why there is dissymmetry. So all the struggles and protests really began at the beginning of last January, and this struggle spread to all the jobs of the museum, because there is a lot of precarity and structural problems that are really important, and there is a lot of people that alarmed since a lot of time about the fact that they are not well paid, that there are not many to do things. For example, I think about the conservation, the restoration of specimen, for example, because the specimen of the museum are several and really variable. There is a lot of diversity in the specimen because it can be of natural history. So, for example, shells, it can be birds, it can be fossils, it can be butterfly, it can be antique pollen, for example. It's really, really diverse, yes. But there is not the personnel to really take care of their specimen. And also, it's important to say that there are not only the specimens that have that need to be safe and in a good way, in a good condition of preservation, but also all the people that enable them to stay, to be shown to the public, to be analyzed by scientists. So there is a really this first mobilization now really win other circle, and it's really concrete now because there is, for example, meetings really important that are began to be real dates. Every Saturday, for example, there is I don't know how to say grève. Strike. Yeah. Every Saturday there's a strike, so the bibliothèque is closed, and people can meet syndicates and persons that are militants for all these things. And there is really a volunteer also to install real meetings between workers. For example, we talk about some picnics maybe with the summer, but also really a will to create festive and collective moments between workers of the museum without the frontier of who is working for private and who is working for public, but really a will to recreate a space and a place where people can meet other people, and with no the obligation of consuming something, of just be together.
And also, if I can add something, is that it's important to know that like it must be for every strike, but it's the result of a pressure that has been accumulating for years. The different government in France has no real interest into putting the value that is supposed to be held for research. They are putting less and less money into science, less into museum, less into culture, and then saying, oh, there's not enough money to take care of this, but then they are increasing the military budget, for example, refusing to tax the wealthiest people and stuff. And so we are having this direct consequences of the refusal to have a just and equalistic way of paying the people that were working into the public system. Also, especially in the museum, they erased the place where we could organize as different worker. We used to have a cantina at the museum that was suppressed because it was not money making enough for the direction, and a lot of different stuff like this. And when the strike began, it was also because there was a confidential document that was shared by mistake, and that was stating how much the people in the museum were supposed to be paid. And so the workers that got their hand on this document, they saw that they were supposed to be paid this amount and were efficiently paid this amount. So they're like,
why?
Why?
Yes.
And so the people from the library were the first one to get into this fight, saying, okay, we don't want something more that we're supposed to have. We just want to have what we are supposed to have. We want to be at the wage that the law is making us supposed to have. And so the whole point of the protest is just to apply the law. It's not something that should be illegal to do or dangerous. It's just that the law is respected. And this is weird because the people from the direction of the museum, the ministry, they're supposed to know the law. They are the one making the law and applying it. And when the strike began, they were like, "Oh yeah, this is crazy. Why are you not paid enough? We're going to look into it." And so the minister is also like, "We don't know why you are not paid enough. We're going to look into it." And you're like, "That's crazy. It's been 3 months since we are supposed to like just get paid what we are owed. I mean, but we are in the science part of the museum, so it's not applying to us, but the non-scientific personnel of the museum." And so this is like a very basic protest, and I think that's why what also helped people to get into the union, get into the strike, because it was not about the direction of the museum that was going to apply the law. It was the union that was supposed to do this during the strike. And so people were like, well, if my employee is not doing what it should, then maybe I will join the union. And so that was a big mobilization force.
So I hear something along the line that the problem are connected to broader questions about public funding, yes,
Yeah.
and political priorities. So, do you think this situation reflects the broader neoliberal transformation in higher education and culture? Is it
Yes.
happening? Is it what's happening?
Yes, of course, it is the result of several years. I don't know at what time we should exactly put the start of these policies, but it's a long time, long years of neoliberal policies. And for example, in the public system, the wages are supposed to increase each year following the inflation. Okay, but it has been years and years that the wages were frozen by the government in order to not increase the public expenses. So yeah, this is totally the result of all the neoliberal right policies since years. And the museum is part of this public system. You know, it's the same today in France in the hospitals, for example. It is the same in the public education systems. We have a lot of strikes also in the public education, in the teachers, middle school and high school teachers. They're facing exactly the same problems as us regarding the very low wages, the very low finances they get from the government to actually realize all these very important tasks which are teaching to children, healing people, preserving our heritage, doing science. You know, it's just very basic stuff that are supposed to be at the foundation of our nation, of our country. And the governments are not taking care of that anymore.
Yeah. We're having a public government system that does not like the public system. And so there's been several governments that are trying to dig a hole in the bottom of the boat we are in, because they're the one that are in power don't like the public system. And sometimes it feels like all the public workers are struggling with their way of life. And I feel like the only public force that is not struggling is the one that allows the government to stand, which is the police.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes,
And
that's something that we can relate as well here in I think.
And I think there is also a paradox because between what is essential and non-essential, because for example, it can be a quite surprising that a government, the French one, which is really happy of all the cultural things, because it's really at the international scale too. It's really something that it really valorize all the patrimony, all things, cultures, etc. But there is really a gap with how it really works, and we saw that also with all the problems that at the end of last year there is, for example, in the Louvre, the Musée du Louvre, where there were a robbery, and that was quite an alarm, but a too late alarm about the fact that there is not enough person to in all the field, not only on the security, that all the buildings have to be restored or better securized, and also that the workers are not working in a good condition. Yes.
Yeah, I don't know if this came in Indonesia, the Louvre robbery, but in France it was a really big thing. And the funny thing is that almost at the same time, there was a robbery at the Museum of Natural History too. Someone stole a 2 million euros golden nugget.
Yes.
But nobody talked about it because there was this big robbery at the Louvre at the same time. And you know, the Louvre is just so big and the biggest museum of France and maybe of the European Union, I think.
Yeah. And it's the third or fourth biggest museum in terms of collection in the world,
Yeah.
actually. So But yeah, and also something that is accentuating this crispation that we have is that this year they are making the celebration of the 400th
Yes.
year of the museum,
Mm.
saying, "Oh, look at this great institution! It's super good. It's what represent France and stuff, and we are so proud of what it is." But us working at the museum, we're like, "Oh, if you are so proud of what we are, why don't you pay us?" Like,
Yes.
Yes.
And if I can add also to how this strike is proof of the liberalistic system applying to research in public works, we answered in terms of being public worker, but I feel that it's also the case into how science is being made. Um, we are striking right now about salaries, but I think there's so much more to strike about.
Yes.
There's this whole conversation we need to have is when to strike and how we can have a strike efficiently. And I feel that maybe now is not the time to strike about changing the way we are doing science, but I feel one day it will come.
I hope to.
But this is the same case, like the pressure you put to the public workers in science is the same, right? We are having, I feel maybe it's the same on your behalf as well, but the pressure we have to deliver science as if it was a merchandise and not like knowledge, to have like a quantity of science that a person should do, which is quantified by the number of articles you publish, the number of impact your article will be having, is also something that when you have neoliberalistic people at the head of the states, they don't understand what is science. Like they don't understand what is utilistic science, like making industry, having inventions that you can commercialize. But working in ecology and evolution is something that doesn't fit into their way of understanding science. And so they are like, you should deliver this amount of science every year. Like, what? And so we're having the heads of the administration of science, they are the ones that are being nominated by the president of the republic. And for example, I am part of the something called the CNRS, which is the National Center of Research and Science. It's the biggest investor of money into science. And the president of the system is having words saying that we should have social Darwinism between scientists. Like social Darwinism is not a true scientific concept. It's just putting in competition people, and it's people that doesn't understand what Darwinism is. And so they're saying that there's not enough money to put into the science. You're like, yes, there is. You just don't want to get them where the money is, which is in the rich people's pocket. But and then they're saying there's not enough money, so you need to be more efficient, more competitive. You need to be better, and so they're putting in competition scientists. And this is something that creates really unhealthy working condition, really unhealthy science as well. They are putting egotistic points of making science ahead than what is the term I'm looking for? Than the ethic work way of working. And this is the pressure applied twice of neoliberalistic into the public work and into the way of making science. And I feel that this is not looking good for science right now.
No.
Yes, I think it's quite prevalent all over the world nowadays, the challenges that we are facing, especially during these days where tension between countries, wars, that creates the changes towards political priorities that government having. So I admire your long history and tradition of collective mobilization, especially when you said interprofession between different profession of workers, but unite as one movement together, unionizing. This is something that we are currently struggling in Indonesia, especially for campus worker to realize that ourselves is also a working class, a worker, that we need to build our solidarity with other working class people, other professions. And so there are this kind of uh, different understanding who is workers, who is labor in our situation. So I'm curious from your experience how to bring this kind of understanding into a more collective action to mobilize as a big union?
Oh, we have the same problem in France, regarding the absence of consciousness that we are actually workers in science. It is in France, it is the same. I mean, a lot of people consider that doing science is just a passion, you do this because you like it, and also because it's a privilege, because you had money to pay the studies that you made to be able to make a master and then a PhD and then pursue. So it is hard to bring this consciousness to people that we are actually also workers and we want to have the same quality of life, of wages, and the same frame, to exercise our work than the other workers. And a lot of people actually don't even have the knowledge of this, I remember having discussions with other young workers in science like me, and they didn't even know how the pension works or how the insurance work. And when you tell them, okay, but if they don't pay you a contract, then you don't have a pension, you don't have a security, they don't even know that, So I think the first step is just to talk about it and to make people be aware of the things that they lose, not being considered as workers, because you lose things, individually. And then collectively is the upper step to realize that if you don't consider yourself as a worker, collectively you lose because you're doing your profession in a diminished way. We could do all of this way better if we had the funding for it, if we had better quality of workers, of working. And so collectively we can win, considering each of ourselves as workers.
Yes, and with the example of the CGT Museum, but I think with a lot of other syndicates, we saw that when people began to think about why not be a syndicate, it's because they already have faced one or maybe twice or maybe more a situation where they have the conscience that their rights or their responsibility were not respected. So it's kind of too late, but I think, but we can always do things together. But I think it's really important to have the memory of how the process of syndicalization appears, and sometimes and I think for the most of the times, it's because the people already have faced something that they don't have to fix. Sorry. But and I think it's really important to have that in mind also.
Yeah, I feel like it's sad, but the easiest people to unionize is the one that are having a hard time, like you were saying, because it's what can create and birth consciousness of working condition and a class consciousness sometimes. Like you feel that is unjust how you are being treated on this kind of situation, and then we kind of come and say, hey, maybe it's capitalism is the problem, maybe it's authority, maybe it's stuff, and you're like, oh yeah, you're right.
Maybe system and not individuals.
Yeah, but the hardest people to convince is the people that are not having that bad of a time. And so this is a thing that we should do not every day, but often. It's like public education where you're like saying, this is how capitalism works. And this is how it makes you forget that it's working this way. And this is how it makes you feel responsible for why you feel bad into this situation. And like, okay, this is the mechanism of capitalism action. And so there's something that is really basic, but it's going back to criticizing the capitalism. And we will have people saying that today, communism has failed in your USSR and China and stuff. And so the neoliberals today will say that communism is finished. Now democracy, liberal democracy won. And so this is the only way of making a society. So if you now are a communist or a Marxist or you're criticizing capitalism, it's like you're people from another time, another era. But when you look into what is capitalism now, well, the criticized that Marx was having more than 200 years ago is the exactly same one we can have right now. And so there's a really important situation is to read the old books, but also apply them to the current situation. And I'm currently reading a lot of books about unionize, about anarchy, about Marxism that were written 150 or 200 years ago. And that's so scary that it's applied very precisely to what's happening today. And with different technologies, but it's the tools of capitalism, the tools of replacing the work union, of replacing the solidarity between the workers. And so I think the biggest thing we should have right now to unionize people is to create this class consciousness by explaining to people, wait, capitalism is not done, and it's even worse now. The disparity between the richness in a society, the wealth between the poorest and the richest, is even way worse now than it was before. Explaining that the solution were already to arise, and there was also alternative. Because I think the biggest thing that is making people despair and lose the hope is thinking that there is no alternative to capitalism, because capitalism basically won into the Occidental society. Like we have famous phrases from people all over Occidental society during the time, like Margaret Thatcher, when she said that we need to do a liberalistic policies, said there is no alternative. And they're like, yeah. Just like the real alternative, just making them not non-existent is what is making capitalism work. So I feel that union, I see them kind of like we are a disease or the rust inside the capitalistic system. And we should like slowly expand and
develop
and create this. And so I think there's an opportunistic way of syndicalist people is to know who is kind of weird to say it like this, but ripe enough to get unionized and have like the politicized background that is allowing them to transform this unwellness they are feeling into a politicized thing. And hopefully it will expand. But I feel like inside the museum, actually, we are expanding our unionizing. And it was first by making people realize they're workers, like you were saying. When I began my PhD, I did not think myself as a worker. I thought myself as a student. But
and
then,
as a lucky people too.
and
Yeah.
as
I'm
lucky
so
people, yeah.
privileged to be here, you know.
Yeah.
Be paid.
And be paid, yeah. And so now you realize, hey, but you're a worker, you are contributing to society, you're contributing to society wealth as a monetary value, but also at a knowledge value. There's laws about work that are applying to you. You are not just someone that is looking into science. You are someone that is working. And so that was a big step for me to get into unionizing, because then if I'm working, then I unionize.
Which one comes first? The realization that you are a worker, or when you already being exposed to classical reading equal contender of current capitalism? Which one comes first?
Do you want to answer first? So I go.
For me, I had a lot of work before being at the museum, and it was always on archaeology and prehistoric field, and it was always short contracts, really with a lot of precarity, and I didn't have the possibility to have an extension of my contract because of how we structure archaeology in France, so with short contracts and a really low probability to have a real job. So when I have this contract here of 3 years to do this PhD, I was just so happy, but I faced a lot of problem with the administration, and because it was a really late process, so I had to have another job to wait for another job. So it's really because I already faced difficulties with my work before having a work contract that I decided to syndicate. So it was in this order for me.
Interesting, because in most of our cases here in Indonesia, including myself, I just started to realize that I've been exploited. It's because I'm exposed to reading critical materials about exploitation, about capitalism. Before that, I think it's just a passion work. This is the way it is. I have to accept, despite all of the struggles, the hardship that I have to deal with. But lately, we understand that this is not right, and we start to unionizing ourselves. And that what makes our union here in Indonesia, campus worker union, having like a reading club, book club, things like that for expand our horizon, our understanding about the situation that we are facing right now. Who are we in this equation that we are absolute workers that being exploited and the gap is just getting wider. So yeah, that's just an example.
Yeah, for myself, it was a bit the opposite because I was growing in a leftist family, so I had a bit of a consciousness of politicized consciousness since I'm little. I've joined my parents in protest when I was very young. Like I think my first protest, I was 5 years old, so I was like being used to this kind of system. But then I wasn't very politicized. I was like following people being politicized. But something that got me into this politicized world is also how the actions are going. And I think it's very nice to go in a protest in France. Like there's a lot of music, you discuss with people. It's a good moment. It's also a moment where you meet people, you joke around, you hear music. It's when the weather is good, it's nice to be outside. You are not giving money, like you're not, it's something you do for free, and it's also nice to have activities in common with people for free. It's something that doesn't happen every time now that you live in when you live in the big cities. And so I like to go and protest because the general thing we were protesting for, I was not agreeing with what was the situation. So I was joining the protest, but then the protest is a nice moment to pass. And then you discuss with people from different age, from different cultural backgrounds, and they're talking to you about their experiences. They're talking to you about Principa on the left. And sometimes it's really more efficient to discuss with someone that you get along with about stuff than to read an old book that is 200 pages. And like we also have to diversify the way of of doing our popular education is to have, I think it's way more useful to politicize people to have bands playing music, politicized music at a party than to read a book on your behalf on your in your room. And so this is also something that we are transforming the union here in the museum, but also all over France, is to have like joyful protestation. When capitalism is putting our moods down, well, the solidarity of workers should be a good moment to spend, you know.
And in that effort, what do you think about the role of media? Because spreading our struggle, our message in today's landscape of digital media. Any opinion about that?
Who wants to go?
About the place of the medias.
Yeah.
This is, I mean, we could do a whole podcast about this matter. In France, there is a huge debate now about this matter, about how the medias are being controlled by people who actually have the power and the money, and so who have a lot of interest to defend. So it is not on their interest that the media talk about the strikes and about criticism of the capitalism and of the system and of the government. So yes, there is this whole debate about the general media, what we call the media, traditional medias. We know that the one that my grandma watch every day on the night. But there are several alternative medias that also have a very strong and always stronger importance in France because they transmit better than the traditional medias these messages, and they are free of all the influences of the powerful people, and they are interested in criticizing the system and not in maintaining it as its current form. So it's all about finding alternatives to the medias.
Yeah, there's also like you should adapt to know who you are talking to, what kind of media is going to talk to you about, how you can, because not everyone around is using the alternative media, so sometimes you still have to work with traditional media to get your message. But there is a lot of lack of trust in the media in France now because most of the private media, like I think the number is 5 or 10 people in France are owning more than 80% of the private media. And media is a business, and a business follows some rules, and sometimes you cannot go to a media and to criticize the owner of the media. It's creating a crisis and you will be censored. So it's really like applying to how do you talk to who, And how do you use the new kind of media? How do you use sometimes not media, but just personal spreading of the information through Instagram or Twitter and stuff like this? And what I wanted to say, I don't remember. And so yeah, there's like for example, the strikes, I feel the strikes, they are always put into a bad vision in the traditional media. Because for example, the classic example is the railway worker will be striking. So on the railway station, there is no trains, there are people waiting for trains. The media are saying, oh, okay, we need to have the freshest information. So we'll send journalists into the railway station, and you do not see strikers at the railway station. You only see people being impacted by the strike. And so they talk to the people that missed the train, and they are saying, oh yeah, the strike is bad because I missed this train. And the media will say, oh, look, the railway workers are taking hostage friends, but not really getting into why there is a strike, which is also something that could come very often. Like when there is a strike, the more the strike is impacting the general population, that doesn't mean that the strikers are bad people that are taking hostage the situation. It's meaning that the people that are striking are showing how important they are to the society, to how the society is not working when they are not working. And this is a way the media is not portraying the strike. So sometimes, yeah, like how do you want to work with them? Is it very efficient to go with these people? It's not sure, and it's a discussion we need to have at every situation and every strike, I think.
Yeah. So I think we come to some kind of conclusion that the challenges is not exactly the same, but the surrounding aspects are quite similar. And in that situation that we are currently facing, how do you think about the international solidarity like we are trying to build here? Any
I think it
opinion?
is key.
Yeah.
I mean, it is as it should be, because we cannot change things only in one country, in a global system where everything is connected. And especially, I mean, in our working system, where a scientist has to move from a country to another, always to collaborate, to work, to study. I mean, internationalism is at the basis. It should be at the basis of all the things that we want to make as a working union. I don't know if you want to add that.
Yes, because it's the condition of workers is international, so we have to unionize, sorry, at the international scales, and also all this internationalism is something that it really a key also historically in how syndicates raised really, because it was the volunteer to create a strength, a real front, an efficient strength of collaboration. And for example, in our case, we all participate to patrimonial, cultural, educative institution. So it's important to also create a solidarity and a link, because more we are, more it's great, and more we are efficient, and more we have an impact. And yes, I think it's the key, and because it's how we can defend priorities, and how we can also defend the autonomy of the research. For example, we will have to face a big problem next year, because in the case of the Muséum National d'Histoire Naturelle, the year 2027 correspond to a new presidential election, with a new president at the head of the Republic. And we know in the institution of the museum that the president of the museum is chosen by the president of the Republic. But it's not new. But in France today, there is a lot of struggle with the far right, racist, nationalist, conservative political parties that is named the Rassemblement National. But there is a lot of others, so it's a really worried situation. So there is a real yes, and I don't know how to say that, but there is a really important impact that will arrive soon about the privatization, the precarization of the people, a new control of sciences, of what is a good subject, what is a bad subject, what is a priority, that what is not a priority, and what is useful, for example, for army, was what can be capitalized to make money. So I think there is a really important element that all institution, all worker of institution and all countries have to face at the same time because of an international context. It's not only a territory with border. It's not only an institution with border, which correspond to the end of the garden of the Jardin des Plantes, for example. It's something that it's really inquiétant, worrying at the large scale. So it's really important not only to build solidarities, but to build collaboration to avoid the worst.
Yeah, and also like international solidarity among the workers, the basic of union. I mean, it's like the words of Marx. It's like workers of all country unionize and work together. And it's because, yeah, I'm not a big proponent of nations. Like for me, nations and frontiers are way to delimiting internal and external markets. But when we are in a worldwide capitalistic and neoliberal situation, we are creating some goods in this part of the world to consume it in this part and this part. And it's like we are a worldwide production society. We should have a worldwide solidarity of workers because even just in science, I mean, why should we stop our union at this frontier? And if you go 10 kilometers forward, it's a different country and you don't have exactly the same condition of doing science. Science knows no boundaries. So the whole point is that to have an international organization. And for example, the things we need to change in science, for me, we cannot change them at a national point of view. We need to change them at an international point of view. Should it be like the edition process, for example, which is something that I really hate about the research. But this should come from all around the world only to have our organization works because the capitalists, they are having an international organization.
I was going to say that.
Yeah. And of even the fascists and the reactionaries, like we are saying, Trump is getting fine with, is getting along with Orban, with Netanyahu, with Bolsonaro, with Giorgia Meloni and stuff. And there's an international solidarity of fascists, kind of, yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
So what is our answer to this? And we are having international solidarity. I think it shown a lot, and it was really good to feel about what's the solidarity with Palestine, for example. When we have workers' unions of the ports and docks in the south of France, in Marseille, that refused to load a boat that was going to send arms to Israel. It's like, yeah, we are helping every small step we can with people that are just trying to have a life, And that's the whole point of solidarity among people. Is not to have solidarity into people from the same nation. It's like every people.
Yeah. So at the end, we still have something to achieve, not just as a hope, but is it, I think it's really possible. Another world is really possible for us to have in the future. And solidarity is part of it, is part of the struggle. So any closing remarks before we end this podcast?
I might have one, but I can let you yours if you want.
First.
In my point of view, we are facing in the next years and tens of years the most important crisis humanity is going through, which is the climate change and the collapse of biodiversity. And this is something that will impact all of us. It will impact humanity at a scale that we are yet to understand clearly, and that we are clearly not answering the right amount of answer we should have. And this crisis, in my eyes, is not compatible with neoliberalism. Like the resolution of this crisis is not compatible with capitalism and neoliberalism, but only with a solidarity of people free of capitalism. And so I think that's the whole thing we need to do is like the greatest struggle is yet to come. And I I'm hopeful that we are going to succeed into finding a solution, but not through capitalism. That would be what I'm finishing by.
Thank you, thank you. Merci beaucoup. We're really honored having the three of you from CGTA Museum for our podcast. Thank you very much once again for sharing your experience, reflection, and struggles with us today. So I think for us, this conversation has been not just informative, learning, but also meaningful because we learn more about the situation currently faced by workers at the French National Museum of Natural History, but also because the issues that we have been discussing, it's resonate strongly with the challenges that we are facing in Indonesia and I believe in many parts of the world. And maybe I would like to close our podcast by saying that today's discussion reminds us that institutions dedicated to science, culture, biodiversity, archives, and public knowledge cannot truly fulfill their mission without recognizing and protecting the workers who sustain them every day. And by saying that, we also want to express our solidarity. So here in our network, our union, we already share the petition that you're having. And I believe many of our members share our solidarity with the ongoing mobilization of librarians and workers at the museum, especially their struggle for fair remuneration, yes. So thank you again for your time, your
Thank you
openness,
very much.
Thank you very
It's a
much.
delight
and
for us.
solidarity.
Yeah.